Welcome back to those of you who were here yesterday, and welcome to those of you who weren't to our now second public event at Sun House. And Sun House, my name is Athir El-Malik, and I'm going to introduce Sun House, which is a new film company. And if you've heard AJ speak before, you've probably heard his mantra about his lifelong desire to create a cinema that mirrors and parallels the power, beauty, and alienation of Black music. And so Sun House is dedicated to creating just that, both in content and in form. And we are dedicated to creating a cinema that is calibrated to the cultural, socioeconomic, and existential particulars of Black being. You can follow us on Instagram at sun_house, HAUS, to stay up to date about upcoming events and projects and films once we fully arrive in the new world. These roundtables are held on the occasion of the streaming of Love is the Message is Death by 13 institutions worldwide. I want to offer thanks to the Smithsonian American Arts Museum and the Hirshhorn Museum for leading this initiative and gathering everybody to stream it, for all of the institutions who have participated and those who have agreed to let the work stream online for free, which fundamentally changes the nature of the work and its circulation. Today, we have another part of this really special series, round 2 of 2 conversations that are happening / have happened this weekend about the place of Black art in the revolution, as curator Thomas Lax put it. And yesterday was really special. It got me thinking about a lot of things, mostly about the pleasure and the responsibility of really caring for artwork and really wanting to frame this conversation as an offering and all of their labor and all of the contribution within a lineage of Black feminist ethics of care for the work, care for how it lives in the world, care for its implications, care for collective process and collective processing. And hopefully these are all ways in which we can normalize in dealing with art and dealing with Black art. And so a heartfelt thank you to everybody who worked really hard to make all of this happen so quickly. Again, to John and Isabel at Osk Studio for this beautiful website, and to Gleb and any other developers who really helped get this live stream together, to Melinda, to Gavin, and to Emily at Gavin Brown for all of their support. And last but not least, to AJ for bringing us all together and for everything he's offered us, not only through this seminal work, but also through all of the thinking and the scholarship and the care with which he has handled his work and in public since then. And so it feels really special to be able to have other brilliant thinkers, artists, and curators engaging in critical discourse with Love is the Message as a point of departure. So without further ado, who better to help us think through all of this than Tina Kampt, who is going to be our moderator for today. And Tina Kampt is the Owen F. Walker Professor of Humanities and Modern Culture.
I feel like we should take a bow. Good morning.
And media at Brown University. Yes. And a research associate at the Visual Identities in Art and Design Research Center at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. Kampt is a Black feminist theorist of visual culture and contemporary art. She's the author of 3 books, and her forthcoming book, A Black Gaze, will be published by MIT Press in 2021. So we are clearly in the presence of greatness. And then next we have Arya Dean, who is an artist, a writer, and a curator based in both New York and Los Angeles. She's currently an editor and curator at Rhizome. Dean's writings have been featured in Text zur Kunst, eFlux, Art Forum, Art in America, Kaleidoscope, and other publications. She's had many solo and group shows in the US and international institutions, such as Green Naftali, the Swiss Institute, and the Serpentine Galleries in London. And next we have Rashad Newsome, who is an interdisciplinary artist working across different mediums and practices. Using the diasporic traditions of improvisation and collage, he pulls from the world of advertising, the internet, and Black and queer culture to produce counter-hegemonic work that exists between social practice, abstraction, and intersectionality.
Hey, everybody.
Isis Pickens is a writer, artist, and advocate working in the realm of community. She's the former First Lady of a Baptist church. She has been called a roots woman whose search for the God of her grandmother led her to spiritual justice work. Her work examines organized religion as it relates to women, justice, and Black spirituality. And last but not least, we have Simone White, who is a poet, a scholar, and a philosopher. She's the author of several books of poetry, including Dear Angel of Death, Of Being Dispersed, and House Envy of All the World. She teaches in the English department at the University of Pennsylvania and lives in New York. Thank you all for being with us today. I'm going to go and observe and bask in your beauty and brilliance from afar. Oh, Simone's on. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Aziel.
Bye.
Hi.
So I need to thank Aziel immensely because she didn't thank herself and all the labor she's put into making this happen. I also need to thank her for that fabulous reveal that she just did on us individually. It was very dramatic, and I think it's a nice start to always start with drama. So yes, as Aziel framed this, we are here to reflect and celebrate on the public screening of Love is the Message is Death. And this is the second of two conversations. This is the second and final, because this is also the final day of the live streaming, or not the live streaming, the public streaming of Love is the Message is Death. I am very excited to be talking to you all, not only because I had such a wonderful time yesterday talking to the group of panelists, but because you all are equally special. And one of the things that I'm really excited about this panel is you all bring very specific sensibilities to thinking about both art in this contemporary moment of revolution, as well as the specific film that has brought us together, Love is the Message. And so I want to try and do something similar to what we did yesterday, which was really create a space for a conversation. So anytime you feel like you want to jump in and reflect or comment, please do that. I'm not going to call on you. But I do also want to start out with I want to sort of structure our conversation around the same questions I posed yesterday, because you bring something different to those questions. So I'm going to start out with the same question, and I'm thinking about it even more after the conversation yesterday, which is thinking about what it means to watch Love is the Message right now, at this particular moment in time. And I'm thinking about that in relationship to seeing it previously in different contexts, right? And one of the things I'm really interested in thinking about is the how and why of anything that has changed between seeing it, for me, like 4 years ago, and having it streaming now, against the backdrop of protest, of people actually saying, right, saying anti-Blackness, right, saying that we are in a moment where we are witnessing anti-Blackness, and that needs to end. So thinking about like your experience of seeing this film, experiencing its power in these two different moments, or in different moments, what's striking you, or what struck you then and now, and what might be different or what might be the same?
Can I go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think something that I've been struck by is the fact that the first time I saw it also happened to be on my computer. Like someone sent me like a rip of it, like illicitly, like in whatever year that was. And so I watched it like at the scale that it's now being broadcast in this moment, and that a lot of people are getting to review it or, you know, encounter it for the first time. And I think that's really interesting just because I guess there's sort of this like circular time principle where like maybe the question of anti-Blackness and images of Black people was very front of mind in that moment, then kind of, I think, really did become part of institutional conversations. And then of course, the video has been, you know, shown all over and like people have had this like revelatory experience. And then kind of we're like back in this moment where like on the internet, it feels like the only thing anyone's talking about right now is the question of Blackness, anti-Blackness, et cetera. But I guess the thing that's like most interesting to me is maybe at that moment, it felt like more of a document of Black life in a way, or that was the way people talked about it a lot. And I had feelings about that in a variety of ways. But now in this like COVID and protest moment, that feels like this like really liminal space between the old world that we just left and whatever is coming, it feels like more of a manifesto in a way or something. And I think that I'm a lot more interested in like, or I've always been interested in like the formal elements of it, but I think just the way that it presents in this moment where we have all these questions about what we're doing and what's coming, it feels really, really different and like exciting in a slightly different way. Yeah.
I think for me, the difference is because I think the first time I saw it was in London in a gallery space. And I agree, Aria, it kind of felt like this, there was kind of like this distance because you're watching it in like a gallery space. But I think that now with the backdrop of everything that's going on and people finally, you know, looking and having some much needed conversation about, you know, the legacy of white supremacy, it seems more emotional to me at this moment. Like I watched it this morning and it kind of took me out, and I hadn't watched it in a long time, and I was just like, and I think that's because of, you know, obviously Arthur's incredible skill as an editor, but then also like that marriage of, you know, the sonic component. I mean, Kelly Price's voice will just send you, right? So like, I mean, Kelly Price with the choir, and then just seeing, you know, these images that just really like vividly depict, you know, Black experience, where it's just like, you know, we find joy and we're being creative, and, you know, we have fun and all of that, but all of these things that are part of like a regular human experience are happening within this container of extreme violence, you know, and it just never lets up. And to watch that video whilst being in that violence, it just is more, somehow it's more intense. And so I think for me, it just, it just feels more intense now, because it's one thing to know that this has happened, for Arthur to kind of like have his confession, but it's another thing for him to have the confession and for that to be really happening in the world and people actually be talking about it and trying to do something about it collectively.
Yeah, for me, I think what you're talking about, the intensity, when I first encountered it, I also saw it on a small screen, but also in a gallery space. I had, you know, the feelings, the natural feelings that come with watching it. But I had no explanation of those feelings. I just had, you know, a flood of feelings. And I attributed it before to when AJ asked me about it, I was like, I don't know, like sad, you know, but now that I see it now in this context right now, what's going on with protests and just where our country is, and then having been removed from it for about 4 or 5 years, I feel like now I have explanation. Like, what is it? Was it sad? Like before, for me, it was, oh, all of these things are happening to us. But now when I look at this piece, the sadness doesn't come in what happens to the Black bodies, but it comes in that space of the joy, or what's perceived as joy in the piece, right? So the dancing, the kind of fun and love and the tender moments, for me, the sadness is not the police in here. The sadness is not enough of the other, right? So right when I'm enjoying this piece, as you're watching it, I'm really enjoying seeing Dougie, I'm enjoying seeing a young boy jump, right? I'm enjoying seeing all of these things. And then before I can enjoy it, boom, I'm hit with these other images. And for me, that means that this piece did something that the terror that's happening to us can't do, right? So the terror that's happening to us almost makes us numb because we've been so accustomed to it. It's almost like when you turn on the news, oh, wow, someone else. But what he's doing by showing us these joy moments is he's making that terror even more terrifying because it jerks you right out of that joy. And so from now, I'm realizing it's a call for the spirit of now is about this is the last time I want to feel this way. And I think the peace also kind of moves me to that. This is the last time I want to feel this way. I want to go back to the joy. It moves the pain points for me.
Mm.
I saw an illicit copy of this video too. And I can't remember when, actually. I would have been, looking for it out of curiosity, probably in relationship to probably to say Pablo. I was probably, compelled more by my interest in that record, which I was really excited and interested in. And I was also interested at that moment. I was writing a book that had to do with St. Paul, and so I think I'm a different person than I was in 2016, truly, and so, and I can feel that difference, the sense of, my curiosity and engagement with, in some ways, a piece of material that I was encountering on the internet, very far away from the gallery spaces for which it had been confined. But also thinking about myself as a person who is Black and also has like a kind of mini theory of American Black life as a kind of confinement, a non-cosmopolitan space, And so I felt like it was for me, to find the thing on the internet and actually the copy I saw was not even it was like somebody standing in a gallery with the iPhone who had just managed to get it online. And I'm sure it disappeared soon after that. But then, also now seeing it, I am really, I'm involved in an emotional way that I probably wouldn't have been 4 years ago, partly because of where I am as a mother. My son, as he grows and I grow with him, he's almost 6 now, he's still really little, but I have become far more, truly terrified about his vulnerability in a way that I knew. I obviously, I am aware of my own mother's fears and of many other mothers who are friends of mine, who have children who are older, both of all genders. But my own sort of relationship to the video has really been colored in this moment by my fear for my son's life. And I'm aware of it.
Mm-hmm. I'm struck by something oh, go ahead, Aria, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think something else that to the point about like being a different person, I think also it's interesting to me thinking about even like research-wise and theoretically and artistically, how my interests have shifted over the course of the last few years, and how I think like watching that film, like watching the video was probably like a huge moment for me in terms of like, okay, like this works in a particular way. Why does it work? So I like maybe also to what Isis was saying. And I think like I became obsessed with like, why does this feel so intense? Like, why does this function this way? And got, I guess, maybe way more interested in like film theory and how it relates to like Black film and Black studies, like, because I was like, I need to understand like what happened here. And I think for me, like that like suffering joy thing comes down to like, or the way I've like internally theorized it is like maybe not so much about the succession of these things, but that there's like this like multiplication factor where it's like not suffering plus joy for me, but it's like suffering X joy that then like erupts into some other like unnameable feeling that's like really the combination of these things. And the succession of the images, it's like each like image of terror has like after image that then like inflects upon the image of joy that follows it. And then again, like makes, like contains that joy within this like horrifying thing. Anyway, so just my like feelings on film theory have like really shifted a lot in relationship to.
That's so interesting. What I was going to say sort of relates to that. It's one of the things that struck me, Aria, about what you said about the sort of tension between, on the one hand, thinking of love as a document of the Black experience versus a manifesto, right? And how does that shift? And I feel like it linked up directly to what you were describing, Isis, when you were talking about seeing it as what happens to us as opposed to feeling through it, right? You know what I mean? And that notion of it being a call to feel or a call to connect to something, right? And so that to me is that tension of like a document, which is something that is not changing necessarily, right? It's a collection of things that happened, and it's preserving those happenings so that we can see them, right? As opposed to a manifesto, which is calling on us to do something, right? It's putting into the world an intention, right? And asking folks, okay, can you rise to this intention, right? Are you going to respond to that intention? Are you going to respond to this possibility? And so that dynamic, I think, is really important when we're trying to understand yesterday and now, right? The fear that you're experiencing, Simone, right? It's directly related to, I don't ever want to have to feel that, right? Right? I feel it now. Let's make it possible to not go back there, to not make that circle. You know, that's the other thing that I also think about is in relationship to what you're saying, Aria, about these cycles of joy and terror that you experience within love, like over and over again, that, you know, you feel this joy, you feel this pleasure, and then it's taken away from you, right? It's taken away from you when you're confronted with, you know, a man being shot in the back while running away, right? So I guess one of the things I really am hearing from you is exactly what does it mean to make a piece of art as a call, right? As a manifestation of something that we want to see and something that we want to realize. Which goes to the question of, you know, what about Black art? I mean, but I actually want to go back to the manifesto and the call, because the other thing that you all were talking about is, you know, how that response gets solicited, right? Emotionally, spiritually. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah. When you're talking about the call, you know, you have to enter where you enter, and I enter from, you know, a place of what is he asking my soul to do? What charge is this artist giving me, or making of me? And if you look at the spiritual pieces, right? So for me, it's all spiritual. It's all a spiritual experience. But when we're looking at a woman singing, and she's singing from a place that you remember, particularly if you know, grown up in a Black church experience or a Black spiritual experience, you know what she's singing. But to silence her in a sense and have the song come out of her voice be Kanye's song, right? And have that intensity happen in a different way, you see something else. And so for me, when I was talking about it moves pain points for me, that becomes a pain point. Whereas outside of the art form, I experience that as a piece or a call to God when a great talented singer is singing the gospel of God, of Jesus Christ. When she is pouring out her heart and her pain in the church context, I experience that as a relief, you know? I experience it as she's taking me somewhere else. But when we remove all of the scriptural context, when we remove all the cultural context of being together as like a people, I have to look at everything else. And so then it makes me look at the scenes where we're in, and I say we, see, I'm calling myself into the piece, right? But when I see us going into the Holy Spirit or having these moments of pure praise and understanding, I'm looking at those moments now as pain points. And so it makes me look at, well, where are the other joy places? And so now I'm looking at the twerking of the body, moving in as a holy experience. I'm looking at the joy of the couples in this dark, sweaty place doing what makes them all feel good and their bodies moving that way as a holy experience. And now I'm looking at what is making her cry that way. What is making the anguish in her face? What is making Mahalia move to that place? What is she fighting? And no, it's like, what are our holy spaces now? You know, and redefining what those holy spaces are. And so I feel like the artist AJ is charging us with questions. He's not saying this is what it is. He's asking us to ask again. So like, what do you want, right? Okay, we know you have pain, you feel that, but what do you want? And how do you imagine that looks, you know?
I would say too, to kind of comment on the pain points thing, one thing that kind of stood out to me too was like you see all these different images, and what comes to mind is how that pain, how you said the pain shows up in the moments that are supposed to be joy. For instance,
Right.
when you see the scenes of like the ballroom scene, right? And as a queer person to watch that and know that that scene was born out of violence within our own Black community, which is deeply connected to white supremacy and patriarchy, which all collude together to oppress us all, right? And so so it shows how like these things that have been oppressing us kind of work together and then show up in our own forms of joy. And so I was thinking about that. And then also even just in the scenes where I forget what you call that Jamaican style of dancing, when it's like really violent on the woman or whatever, and then she's kind of getting hurt, and like how that kind
Staggering.
of is playing into patriarchy and stuff like that, and how even in our moments of joy, that kind of violence is coming up too. And it's like, well, and where do we truly find like pure joy? But then I think kind of like the transcendent part is that, you know, which I think is something that I try to do in my work, and I find that I feel like AJ tries to do too, is that I'm really interested in how, I mean, I think through, because to go back to the church, right? We find healing through coming together. If you strip like that whole experience of like the dogma of religion and all of that,
Right.
it's really about these Black bodies coming together and the power that happens when they come together. And I think that's something that you see in all of those joyful moments. And so to me, that kind of call is like, what does it look like for us to come together and let go of all of the bullshit and actually come together in the truest form of what it means to come together? And then you get the sun, right? And you see like how powerful the sun is. And so to me, I think that is sort of the way I connect to it in that aspect.
You know, go ahead, Simone.
I was just going to say that one of the interesting moments in the last few days as I've been watching Love is the moment where there's the very beginning commentary, and then the one about the fire. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Those are two of the most interesting moments in the film for me. And, you know, partly because they are moments where it is actually not clear what the emotion is. And there's certainly, you know, for me, like a person who is a lover of all kinds of humor that other people don't think is humor. For me, those are the moments of like emotional relief or release, you know, where there isn't, in that moment where someone is actually speaking and the soundtrack is quiet, because that's what this is, right? A soundtrack. The soundtrack quiets and we just hear somebody, an ordinary somebody, talking about an incident of kind of terror that has occurred in their lives, you know. But it's not police violence, right? It's a different kind of violence. And for me, as you know, as a writer, those moments are really fascinating because they put me in conversation with those speakers in a way that other parts of the video don't feel conversational, in part because of the numbness that one can feel when confronted with images of murder and violence, but also of a certain kind of what can we say about that, this sexuality? Let's just call it sexuality, wherein, you know, I feel I want to have something to say about that and the connections, you know, between the kinds of violence that we are seeing and that particular articulation of what it means to be in a sexual situation, what it means to be in, what it is to have a female body and to want sex, right? And yeah, I like the moments of less. Or something. Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking when you were talking, when both Isis and Rashad were talking, about sort of spirituality and release. There's one moment that I love in Love is the Message, which is so brief, but it's so profound for me. And it's the one where you see, it's a brother in like a pastel suit, with his hair pulled, his hair combed back,
Yes.
and he's just swaying. He just sways and he's looking. And anybody who's been in a Black church knows he's in a choir. That's a particular kind of sway. And you know that he's part of a whole group of people swaying. And in A Kingdom Cometh As, you see the full picture and you see that he's actually with Lateria Wooten while she's doing that solo. But the way he is cropped in that, when he appears in Love is the Message, there is this glow of inner peace, right? And it stands out to me in Love because of everything else you're talking about, right? Because of the intensity. And there's this moment where every time I see him, I'm just captivated by the fact that, he's like this pillar of peace in the middle of turmoil, right? And it's a particular way in which I often think about it, I often think about anti-Blackness as gravity, right? It is pulling Black people down. That is white supremacy, is gravity. And that one of the things that I see in Love is Black folks counter gravity, right? So the other thing that happens is you also see all these bodies being thrown down and then bouncing back up, right? And so it's this way in which Black folks have to defy gravity to live and to survive. And that there is that way in which in Love, it's a counter-gravitational flow, right? It's counter-gravitational. And I always love to think about the way in which Black bodies move in that relationship. I mean, it comes back to a point that we were talking about yesterday that Simone, you also raised, which is about like, how do we contend with this sort of proliferation of images of the violated Black body, right? How do we contend with that? And I think that that's the other thing to me about having Love screening right now, is that what we are inundated by are these images of the violated Black body. And this is a moment when that is soliciting a response, right? That the circulation of it is now, being mobilized. So I guess I also want to hear, I'm curious about what you think about, there's always the famous story about how AJ intended to put Love out on the internet initially, before Khalil reeled him back in and said, this is a piece of art, And now we've come full circle where it's intentionally being streamed so that everybody gets access to it. I'm curious about, what do you think about that? About we talked about it yesterday, is like liberating love, right? Liberating love is the message. And what does that say to all of you who have an artistic practice? What does that mean to you?
I mean, to me, it just brings you back to that, the pickle that all artists are dealing with, which is, can, the art space, the canonized art world, ever be a space for true transgression, right? These are historically hegemonic spaces that are inculcated in so much capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, all of it, right? And so, like, as an artist, what can you do in that space that is not in some way going to be implicated in that apparatus, right? And so, but I think, and I think everybody is figuring that out for themselves. I'm not trying to like finger wag and say there's one way to do it, but I think that this piece is like, I guess in some ways, a blueprint of a way to do it, right? It's like he made the piece and his intention was originally to have it be for everybody, but then it went through the sort of prototypical channels of like the canonized art world, and certain people saw it and gave it certain visibility, and then it got to a point to where he can then come back to the original idea and show it to everybody. And so And the hope is that maybe like taking that quote unquote hit for the team has kind of resulted in more resources or more something that can kind of actually advance the original idea from the gate, you know. So yeah, I think everybody is figuring out how to work within that space. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. I mean, like when I first saw it, like at Rise, I'm at my job at like as a curator, we focus on like born digital artworks, and I always been really interested in thinking about it as like a born digital artwork and as sort of like actually internet artwork in some ways, because like it is. I mean, the textures of it, the like way that the like images are compressed and like put next to like our, you know, you have like really like low grade like meme kind of like image quality next to like archival like film, but then you know with the like Getty Images watermark, and it feels like of and for the internet. And I think that like the way that it's circulated in the art space has been so fascinating to watch in terms of also just what the real differences are between how we view things in circulation online and then how we view them when, you know, we stand in front of like a massive screen and like a, you know, beautiful installation and watch something in that way. And how also our shifting understanding of the relationship between the reality and images, especially with relationship to Blackness and how we understand like Black people collectively and the way that media has formulated many of those, you know, the stereotypes, the assumptions, the idea of Black life, especially for white America. I think like viewing it, if it had just had a life online, I always wonder what the story would have been. Like, could it have been sort of shoehorned into the sort of like pedagogical, like, you know, viewpoints of the art world, the way that the art world talks about, you know, reflecting Black life, or like the, you know, like we're learning about like, you know, Black excellence, like whatever, like all these things. Like, I think it's life online. There's like this, like, yeah, alternate life it could have had. And it's really exciting that it's getting to have it. I also think that like, it's like really loose thought, but I think it's something really interesting as well in terms of the libidinal economy of the work, and, you know, placing those images of police violence in the place where we most often encounter them and circling them alongside other images like that versus, yeah, sort of placing them in a different economy that then, yeah, like tries to, or doesn't try to switch up what it means, but I think ends up having this effect where it's like treated quite differently versus, like, I think for white audiences in the art world, going to see Love is the Message in a museum becomes a very specific experience that's divested from the experience of the like ethics of witnessing like police brutality online, but watching it online like re-sutures that relationship and forces the viewer to understand it more in relationship to those things that are constantly circulating, especially at this moment. Yeah.
I think the other thing too is that we should say, I believe the original intent for the project was for it not actually to just go on the internet, but actually to be this thing that is erected in cities across the globe and Black communities, and for people to experience it. And so I think, you know, my hope, because that was the original idea, my hope is that through, like I said, that quote unquote hit for the team that he took by going through like the hegemonic art world will now allow that to happen. Because I think to me, that becomes this thing of like us creating our own forms of like institutions and galleries that we support in our communities. And I think that's really important. Which I think is in a lot of ways what Sun House is trying to do as a project, right? Which is kind of interesting because Sun House has now emerged after this video has become wildly successful. So here we are, like the very thing that was the hope for to happen if actually happened.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because someone posed the question to me, aren't you, as a community person, a person who works outside of you know, the gallery and museum space, aren't you really excited that it's being released in this way? And yes, I am really excited that it's being released this way. And of course, I'm telling everyone I know who would not normally go to a space like this, but I encountered something. I encountered in trying to send it to all of, you know, my friends and groups of people that I know work outside of the art world, time. What happens when you can see this space, when you can see this in a space that's designed for you to see it, you don't have to deal with the other things in life. So I was hearing things like, well, after I get off work, or hold on, I put the kids to bed, or, I mean, people were living life and the burden of life did not allow them to, when I'm just pressing them urgency, it's only 48 hours, you must, you know? And then of course, when they saw it, they were like, wow, like, thank you for, you know, putting this, but when I was talking to someone about it, I said, yeah, there is something special about having all other life problems or issues isolated so that you can focus on this piece, right? And so for that reason, the gallery and museum space is important and almost essential to experiencing it in a different way, right? Whereas seeing it on my computer or seeing it on my phone, I still have the noise of the responsibilities behind me. But now I can focus my attention. So I'm so glad, Rashad, that you said, yeah, originally he wanted to create spaces in community where you can isolate that, but still where the people can get to, still in the context of who they are, but giving that same, isolation and focus to this piece so that it can have whatever it needs to do what it's supposed to do. So thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate that.
I'm actually not sure what the hit for the team is, but I am very interested in just the fact of the multiple institutional players who have a stake in this now important work of art. And I'm very interested in thinking about how every institution that I'm associated with has a stake in me and what I do. Partly because, on the one hand, like I have a job, which is like a kind of ordinary job, an institutional job as a professor of literature. But that came late. And, I had expected that my practice of art would be a very obscure writing practice all my life. I never expected to have the job I have. I never expected anybody to read my work, not really. And so I am not exactly sure how I feel about institutional involvement with I'm going to use the words that other people use, which is the Black radical tradition. I'm not sure that I even want to be using those words to describe my own work, but I think that our attitude about institutional entanglement has to change. There is no clear black and white in terms of how these institutions will affect our work. There is no clear black and white about the necessity of being involved with them in order to eat. There is no clear position to take about the nature of, for example, the endowment of new Black institutions by the investment of certain totally anti-Black institutions in certain works like this. And so I'm still thinking this through. I don't have an answer. But it's kind of like currently a subject of my own work emotionally. And it's a really, really important question.
Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of speak to, again, to that, when I say that quote unquote hit for the team, I think that's exactly what I'm talking about, is that, it is this thing. I don't think that it's that black and white either, but I think we must think critically about it, as someone who is a Black, gay, visual artist working in a very white, hegemonic art world, and who has achieved a certain amount of success. There is a lot of like emotional work that goes into creating that kind of experience that is very emotionally expensive, And so you kind of have to, you can hold that, okay, I can be in this space and kind of make it a space of liberation, right? But also that should not suggest that you can't look at it and see how problematic it is. And that, I think that as Black creative folk in those spaces, I think that's the pickle we're always kind of in, that I think a lot of people are not,
Oh, you wanted
I think in addition to that, though, I mean, for me, I think, even having an institutional job alongside my practice and like writing about art and stuff, I think the hit to me that he's taking for the team is, I think, the fact that so many of these institutions, while well-intentioned and providing resources and providing access and distribution for this project and other projects by Black artists, the level of discourse that they're able to apply to the work is just so impoverished in so many cases, where it's really not like, they're not coming from the Black radical tradition or like Black studies or like, even an engagement with like the actual particularities of the intellectual history of a lot of the work, such that, half the time it ends up, as an artist, I can only speak for myself, like I've ended up in situations where I feel like, you know, my work is being engaged basically like, oh, look, she's a Black woman. She did a thing, like, yay. And like, it's really like exhausting emotionally and intellectually, because it's like, no, like each of us is invested in a very particular project that we've come to, you know, in the course of our practices. And that should be connected to the larger story of what it means to be Black, to make art, to write, to make films, et cetera. But we can't reduce it down to just the sort of like, you know, like, and I think that, for instance, like with this work, it's I think why I've been like really, really invested in thinking through the formal elements of it, because I think many times I've seen it presented or talked about, it's like, it's just boiled down to like, this nice thing about like what it's like to be Black and how there's a lot of different images of Black people doing stuff. And it's like, no, this is like a really like multi-layered thing. So I think that's my frustration with institutions, but I think it's really good. I know, I mean, like, yeah, I don't think it's like we shouldn't, you know, I think we have to think about how we engage them. I was also going to say just something brief about, I think it's also in terms of, I think what Isis was saying about like viewing it with other people and sort of what the institutions have offered in terms of the experience of it. I do think that it has been really important for myself, even the experience of viewing it alone on the computer versus viewing it like alongside other people and feeling that like just even the energy of other human beings in the space is really interesting. And then also comparing that to other later works like Mechanics of Empathy, which like, you know, twists the concept a bit and does something different. And then the White Album in Venice, when that like flips it, you know, and kind of the comparing and contrasting of those, and how between like the White Album and Love Is the Message, like such bizarro, weirdly different experiences. So that's something that's interesting to me. So
I just want to add in here, because I've just gotten a few questions from the audience, or actually some synthesized questions from the audience, which is that there seem to be a lot of questions about the Kanye West soundtrack, and about the relationship between Kanye's song, Kanye, you know, as the figure that he is, and the actual, you know, the actual images and the account that's being presented, or the accounts that are being presented through through AJ's cinematographic, you know, editorial piece. So it seems, so what we're being asked, here's one way of putting it, is there are a lot of questions about the Kanye West soundtrack to this video and his value system that feel antithetical to the ethics of Black Lives Matter. Can folks reflect on this, about the tension between the Kanye West soundtrack and the rest of it? Oh, Aria, look, oh, you got it. You have got to give voice to what that face is saying.
I'm just thinking, I was like, I was thinking about how I'm gonna get in trouble, like with whatever I'm gonna say, because like I haven't like departed from Camp Kanye. You know, I remain like invested in the Kanye project in many ways, personally and creatively, intellectually. I mean, I just think it's super complicated. I mean, one thing I do think is like, I mean, the language of the, I don't know if that's exactly what the person asked, but I think that like, there to me is a problem in also reducing just work around being Black or just work from Black people to like Black Lives Matter project. I think like that's an umbrella that we're using right now to understand like the sort of aims for Black people in the US and globally. Like, but I think like we can't just like only call like Black political life and Black artistic life like Black Lives Matter project. And so with that, I think it's like, because I think we do have to like engage again the multiplicity of thought. Obviously, I mean, there's problems with what Kanye has, the way he's like operated in certain ways. I think though, like his work has been really important to me, and I think like even his attitude in ways like is something that I think about a lot and is really interesting. I also think there's this article in it was in Mask magazine a few years ago. I can't remember the title of it, but it's about like the sort of transference of Black radical politics into the hip hop and like popular culture sphere, and how like there's this renewed or a new or sort of emergent desire for like Black celebrities and cultural figures to like be like political. I mean, there's always been that relationship, obviously, in the 20th century as well, sort of like Black political figure and Black celebrity or Black cultural figure as same entity. But I think thinking just about the sort of internal paradoxes between like hip hop culture and quote unquote like Black radical politics, and also overlaps, and sort of this question, again, I'm asking question is like, why do we want Kanye to like represent like, you know, a good like, yeah, I don't know, like political like leadership within the culture sphere. It's an interesting question to me.
I mean, I want to follow it up with, because there's a few questions that sort of are asking exactly this. And I love the way they're formulating it. I'm wondering how Kanye's arc also reflects so many elements of the African-American experience. Self-made, pushed down, achieved excellence, money, power, yet still has doors closed to him, seemingly suffers multiple breakdowns, very conscious marriage to a chameleon who represents so much of our commercial packaging of everything and often embodying appropriation, and his ultimate term to Trump because of his message, however false, of taking down the system and personal achievement that puts you beyond the reach of other societal powers, primarily as a means of gaining control and revenge against perceived oppressors. Has the intervening time between the making of this art and the present day proven the choice of music to be even more prescient than it may have been at the time, especially with the addition of Chance the Rapper's more pristine and grounded arc to juxtapose to Kanye's? I mean, I think that's a really fascinating question about, like, you know, maybe Kanye is much more representative, right? As opposed to a divergence from, you know, the arc of African-American, of the Black experience in the United States.
I can talk about Kanye personally. I don't know him, but I feel like I think the question is actually about like the role Black music has played and the role the Black musical artist celebrity has played.
Right.
Which is like so complicated, especially I think for people who identify as women. You know, I was thinking about Mahalia's face and Nina Simone's face and Hortense Spiller's face and Saidiya Hartman's face and Kanye's music. And, you know, and about Baraka and about Al Green, you know. And so there isn't a center of values, as I think Ari was saying, for Black people, you know, and folks whose values can never align with mine in any way have made some sublime music. And you know, that's in some ways that's what this thing represents to me. It is about, you know, the incredible incompatibility, incommensurability, right, of feelings that we have to hold as Black folks, as Black people who wish for more freedom or any kind of freedom, right? And that sometimes the people who lead us spiritually actually cannot be in our houses with us. No. And, you know, and so, I don't know, that was a great question.
I'm like,
I feel like what they used to say when I was a kid, the truth can come out of a liar's mouth. And I think that this whole notion that because Kanye is complicated in some ways, or that we disagree in some ways, that he is not representative of who we are, or that he can't experience what we feel, or that we can't experience something through him. And so the whole film is the piece that he put out includes all of us. You know, like some people look at it and say, well, why did he put that in? And some other people say, well, why did he put that in? He put all of us in, you know, he put everything into that thing, and including Kanye. And the fact that he's included in there, it just pushes that point of who are we? What do we have to say? And the piece is the piece because it's a Kanye song. Like that's part of the reason it does what it does to us. And so you know, this cancel because we don't like what he has to say. I don't know if that's useful. I just don't know if that's useful to Black art. I don't know if it's useful to Black people. I know some of the best conversations edifying conversations, you know, like growth conversations I've had have been in spaces where I differ from people, where I differ so much that I begin to know who I really am because I encounter that thing, you know? And so yeah, I don't know how I feel about people asking us to say that Blackness is only this. And I mean, I think that's what we're arguing. I think as artists, that's what you guys are arguing. Black is not only this thing, you know, Black is everything and the things you have not thought of yet, you know?
Yeah.
So,
And I think that, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, I think, yeah, that's what I'm excited about. I think, like, to me, it's like if we can enter the next phase of whatever is coming in the world, like with, you know, considering the fact that like we're at the center of this, you know, movement or whatever, you know, we want to call what's going on. It's like, how do we then convert like what so many artists already know, which is that, yeah, we all think something slightly different. We all have these projects. How do we convert that into like an actually like new, or like continue the epistemological project that like so many of the people who come before us have been a part of, but actually taking it all the way into the institution, being like, you know what, yeah, like actually you can't just curate a show that's like Black people doing sculpture. You have to do a show that's like, oh, like what's happening with this line of thinking, and actually like do the work, do the research and think through, because it's just too broad. And it's like, we're all doing so much work and it's so interesting, and to sort of let it just kind of like flow and not like, you know, anchor the connections and really understand for ourselves also continually like how we're relating to one another's work, and being allowed to disagree and have different, like, yeah, I don't know, I just think it's like an important to then like cement that and make that like a real project that has multiple homes or whatever.
Yeah, I think that I kind of think back to what you said, Tina, and like, could Kanye be like the perfect representative of the piece? Because I think that the piece in a lot of ways is showing like these like this myriad of like singular representations of Blackness. And so, you know, if you look at Kanye's trajectory, it's like he is almost like the embodiment of like so much of the material that's in the video. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to align with his politics, right? But I mean, this is art, right? There's no, you know, this is abstraction, right? We're like, at a certain point, we have to separate the actual person from the thing that they produced, because it's already removed from that by coming into Arthur's piece, right? And then also, I think another part is just even like music in general is a collective effort, particularly in Kanye's way of working. And so you got to acknowledge that there was the Black choir in there. That is a huge component of what we are connecting to.
yes.
Not Kanye's auto-tune singing, and then Kelly Price's,
Right.
I mean, incredible voice too, right? And so I think that it just shows, I mean, it goes back to Arthur's understanding that sonically, well, the music space has always been a space where Black folk have dominated, right? And bringing the power embedded in that particular diasporic tradition into the work. And you know what I mean? And so at a certain point, Kanye's actual like political views and at a certain point start to become really irrelevant, you know?
Yeah.
So we've gone about 5 minutes over because we started about 5 minutes late. But I think that this is an amazing place to end up with a commentary on Black art being something that is not necessarily about the person, right? That it's not the person, and it's not a representation of a Black person, nor of a singular representation of the Black experience. And that we actually have to think about the ways in which it challenges us to think about the multiplicity of the Black experience. And you know, that was actually my second question, you know, sort of what is the role of Black art in this moment? I think you've actually already answered that. So I'm just gonna wrap up by thanking all of you for sharing this space and for the brilliant comments, reflections, and insights that you've given us. And I'm sad that this is going to wrap up the streaming, that this is the last day. So a fond farewell to Love is a Message until we encounter it again.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.